Silicon Valley has a religion. It doesn't worship gods. It worships founders, young, brilliant, unstoppable. People who claim they will change the world, and often do. In this world, ambition is not questioned. It is celebrated. And in the early 2000s, a 19-year-old college dropout walked into this ecosystem with a dream so bold, so emotionally powerful, that logic quietly stepped aside. Her name was Elizabeth Holmes. She wasn't loud. She didn't chase attention. She spoke softly, slowly, as if every word carried weight. And the dream she described was simple, almost poetic. A world where blood tests didn't require vials. A world where disease could be detected early. A world where one tiny drop of blood could unlock hundreds of medical answers. It sounded humane. It sounded revolutionary. It sounded like the future of healthcare. And in Silicon Valley, the future is the most profitable product of all. Elizabeth had left Stanford University. That detail mattered because the greatest legends of tech had done the same. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg. Dropping out wasn't seen as failure. It was seen as a sign of genius too big for classrooms. She built a company called Theranos. The name combined therapy and diagnosis, healing and knowledge. It felt intentional, almost sacred. Investors didn't just see a business, they saw a mission. And missions attract belief faster than evidence. Elizabeth cultivated an image: black turtlenecks, minimal emotion, a deeper voice than most expected. Some thought it was natural. Others later wondered if it was practiced. But image in Silicon Valley is part of the product. She looked like a visionary, and visionaries are rarely interrupted with technical questions, because asking too many questions makes you look like the person who doesn't get it, and no one wants to be that person. Money began to flow. Not small money, serious money. Billionaire investors, political figures, former secretaries of state. Her board of directors included people who understood power, diplomacy, military strategy, but very few understood laboratory science. Still, that didn't slow anything down, because belief was already moving faster than proof. Theranos claimed it had built a machine that could run hundreds of blood tests from a single finger prick. No needles, no pain, lower cost. It wasn't just innovation, it was hope. Hope for patients afraid of hospitals. Hope for families managing chronic illness. Hope for early detection of deadly diseases. Hope is powerful, and when hope meets money, questions tend to disappear. Inside Theranos, the company grew rapidly. Glass offices, secure labs, high secrecy. Employees were divided into departments that rarely communicated. Information was controlled tightly. Some staff members noticed problems, machines failing, results inconsistent. But Silicon Valley culture had a phrase: fake it till you make it. The idea that vision comes first, reality catches up later. But medicine is not social media. In healthcare, mistakes don't mean app crashes, they mean lives. Still, outside the company, the myth grew stronger. Magazines featured her on covers. She was called the youngest self-made female billionaire. She stood on stages under bright lights, speaking about changing the world, and audiences believed her. Because the story made sense: a young genius, a noble mission, a breakthrough technology. It had all the ingredients of a legend, and legends are easier to accept than doubts. There's a moment in every great deception when the illusion becomes bigger than the truth, when the story becomes too beautiful to challenge. Elizabeth Holmes had reached that moment. Theranos was now valued at $9 billion. But behind the clean designs, the confident interviews, the powerful board, a silent question remained inside the labs. What if the technology doesn't actually work? But that question was still quiet, and the dream was still loud. Success creates silence. The bigger a company becomes, the harder it is to question. Inside Theranos, the hallways were bright, modern, controlled. But behind secure lab doors, engineers and scientists were fighting a different reality. The machines, the ones meant to change medicine, struggled. Tests failed, readings fluctuated, results couldn't always be reproduced. In science, repetition is truth. At Theranos, repetition was a problem. Employees began noticing something else. When demonstrations were shown to investors, the machines didn't always run real tests. Sometimes traditional commercial lab machines were used in the background. The public story said one thing, the technical reality said another. But speaking up wasn't simple. Theranos had one of the most aggressive legal teams in Silicon Valley. Employees signed strict confidentiality agreements. Questions were seen as disloyalty. Doubt looked like betrayal. Some workers who raised concerns were removed quietly. Others stayed silent because careers are fragile, and fighting a billion-dollar company can feel impossible. Elizabeth Holmes remained calm. Publicly, she spoke about impact, access, the future of healthcare. Privately, pressure increased, deadlines tightened, expectations rose, but the technology wasn't catching up to the promise. There's a dangerous line in innovation, the line between optimism and deception. Theranos was drifting toward it. Patients had started using Theranos testing centers inside pharmacies. Real people, real blood. Some received results that later were questioned. Abnormal readings, false warnings. For a patient, a blood test is not data. It's a diagnosis, a decision, sometimes fear. And now, the stakes were no longer financial. They were human. Inside the company, a few employees reached a breaking point. They weren't angry, they were worried. One former staff member would later describe the environment as a place where the story mattered more than the science. That's when something changed. The illusion had survived investors. It had survived internal doubts, but it was about to face its most dangerous opponent: verification.
A journalist from the Wall Street Journal began investigating, not with accusations, with questions. How does the device work? Where are the peer-reviewed studies? Why won't independent labs test it? These questions were normal in science, but threatening in Theranos' world. The company responded with legal pressure, warnings, denials, counterclaims. But facts don't respond to intimidation. They surface slowly, then all at once. Former employees began speaking, carefully, quietly. Documents emerged, internal reports, emails. The story that had once been airtight now had openings, and through those openings, reality began to show. The machine that promised hundreds of tests from a drop of blood couldn't reliably deliver them. For years, Elizabeth Holmes had mastered rooms filled with powerful people, but now she faced something different: evidence. And evidence doesn't listen to confidence. It doesn't respond to charisma. It only answers to truth. Outside, the world still saw a rising icon. Inside, the foundation was weakening. The gap between image and reality had become too large, and when gaps grow too wide, collapse is only a matter of time. The question was no longer whether Theranos would be challenged. The question was how far the fall would reach. When a story collapses, it doesn't explode, it unravels, thread by thread. After the investigation reports were published, the world began to see Theranos differently. Partners distanced themselves, pharmacies ended testing agreements, regulators stepped in. The company that once promised to redefine medicine now struggled to defend its own data. Elizabeth Holmes didn't disappear. She stood firm in interviews, calm, composed, certain. She said the technology would be proven. She said critics misunderstood the vision. Because when someone has built an identity around changing the world, admitting failure can feel like erasing the self. But systems that move slowly can also move relentlessly. Federal investigations deepened, financial records examined, internal communications reviewed, lab practices questioned. This was no longer about innovation. It was about whether investors and patients had been misled. Theranos began shutting down operations. Employees left, offices emptied. The billion-dollar valuation faded into numbers that meant nothing. A company once compared to Apple ended in silence. Then came the trial. Courtrooms don't run on inspiration, they run on evidence. Prosecutors argued that Holmes knowingly misled investors about the technology's capabilities. The defense said she believed in the vision, that she was trying to build the future, not fake it. The case raised a difficult question. At what point does belief become fraud? Witnesses described internal pressure, overstated claims, demonstrations that didn't reflect reality. Investors spoke of trust, of confidence placed in a founder they believed would change healthcare. And slowly, the narrative shifted from visionary to defendant. In 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud. The symbol of innovation became a symbol of overreach, not because dreaming is wrong, but because in medicine, hope without proof can cause harm. Theranos didn't fail because people wanted progress. It failed because image replaced verification, because authority replaced expertise, because the story was too beautiful to interrupt. Elizabeth Holmes once stood on stages speaking about the future. Now her story is studied as a warning, not just in business schools, but in psychology. How easily humans trust confidence, how quickly reputation shields doubt, how a compelling vision can silence critical thinking. The most unsettling part of the Theranos story isn't the money, it's how many intelligent, experienced people believed. Because deception at this level doesn't look like crime, it looks like optimism, it looks like progress, it looks like the future. Every era has its kind of fraud. Some use guns, some use computers. This one used hope. And hope, when mixed with ambition and power, can be the most convincing illusion of all.